They doubted him, until they saw what he did on the mat. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be completely invisible in a world that only sees strength? To walk through halls where your existence barely registers, where your voice carries no weight, and where your dreams seem as fragile as morning mist? The fluorescent lights of Jefferson High buzz with the same relentless energy that pulses through its concrete corridors. Here, in this maze of lockers and teenage ambition, hierarchy isn't just understood, it's carved into the very walls like ancient law. Football players own the center hallways, basketball stars command the cafeteria, but in the basement gymnasium, where the air hangs thick with decades of sweat and determination, wrestling rules with an iron fist. At 16, Elijah Carter moves through these halls like a ghost haunting his own life. His shoulders, narrow beneath a flannel shirt that's seen too many wash cycles, hunch forward as if trying to shrink into invisibility. The sleeves hang loose around his thin wrists, and his jeans, 3 sizes too big, bunch awkwardly around worn sneakers that whisper against the polished floor. Hand-me-downs from a cousin who grew out of them 2 years ago. Clothes that carry the weight of other people's memories. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Elijah's world exists in the spaces between notice, while others stride with purpose, claiming territory with every step. He navigates the margins. His locker sits in the forgotten corner near the maintenance closet, where the ventilation system creates a constant low hum that drowns out whispered conversations. It's perfect camouflage for a boy who's mastered the art of being overlooked. The morning ritual never changes. Elijah arrives 15 minutes before the first bell, when the hallways still echo with emptiness. He exchanges textbooks with mechanical precision, his movements economical and silent. By the time the popular kids burst through the entrance doors, trailing clouds of expensive cologne and confident laughter, he's already disappeared into the maze of corridors, a shadow among shadows. In first period English, Mrs. Patterson calls on him exactly twice per week, never more, never less. His answers are correct but unremarkable, delivered in a voice barely above a whisper. She nods approvingly and moves on, her attention already shifting to the students who raise their hands with theatrical enthusiasm, hungry for recognition. Lunch unfolds in the library, where Elijah claims the same corner table every day. He unwraps a peanut butter sandwich, store-brand jelly bleeding through discount bread, while around him the social ecosystem of Jefferson High plays out its daily drama. Through the windows, he watches the football team sprawl across their designated picnic tables, their laughter carrying on the autumn wind. The wrestlers occupy the steps leading to the gymnasium, their broad shoulders and confident postures marking them as the school's warrior class. But it's during these quiet moments, when the world assumes he's not paying attention, that Elijah observes everything. He notices how Troy Maddox, the wrestling captain, never actually looks at the people he's talking to. His eyes constantly scan for bigger fish, better opportunities. He sees how Coach Reynolds walks with the slight limp of old injuries, how his right shoulder dips when he thinks no one's watching. He catalogues the way Marcus Johnson, the star running back, unconsciously favors his left knee, and how Sarah Chen, the debate team captain, fidgets with her pen when she's nervous. Se essa história te lembrar de algo que viveu, compartilhe sua experiência nos comentários. Ela pode tocar o coração de alguém hoje. The afternoon hallways become a different kind of theater. As classes change, Elijah times his movements to avoid the crush of bodies that surge between rooms. He's perfected the art of the shoulder turn, the quick sidestep, the downward glance that signals his willingness to remain invisible. When someone accidentally bumps into him, and it's always accidental, they mutter a distracted apology without meeting his eyes, their attention already focused on more important things. But invisibility comes with unexpected privileges. People speak freely around him, as if he's furniture. He overhears breakup conversations, academic struggles, family problems that would never be shared intentionally. Teachers discuss problem students in hushed tones while he organizes worksheets nearby. Coaches complain about player attitudes while he restocks equipment closets during study hall. It's during one of these inadvertent eavesdropping sessions that Elijah first hears Coach Reynolds talking to the athletic director about the wrestling program's upcoming challenges. State qualifiers are 6 weeks away, and injuries are mounting. The JV team lacks depth. Even the varsity squad, despite Troy's dominant performances, shows cracks in its foundation. "We need bodies," Coach Reynolds says, his voice carrying the weariness of 23 years in education. "Good bodies or warm bodies doesn't matter anymore. These kids today..." He trails off, but Elijah fills in the unspoken criticism. "These kids today don't understand sacrifice, don't appreciate the grind, don't respect the tradition." That evening, Elijah sits at his kitchen table, a folding card table his mother bought at a garage sale, and stares at a wrestling sign-up sheet he printed from the school website. The paper feels impossibly thin in his hands, like it might dissolve if he breathes on it too hard. Around him, the small apartment holds its familiar silence. His mother won't be home for 3 hours, not until her shift at the diner ends and she completes her evening cleaning job at the medical complex downtown. The apartment tells its own story of careful budgeting and quiet dignity. Mismatched furniture, arranged with an eye for comfort rather than style. Plants rescued from grocery store clearance racks now thriving on every available windowsill. And television older than Elijah himself, its volume permanently set 2 notches too low to avoid disturbing the neighbors. Agora respire fundo e prepare-se para uma jornada que pode mudar sua forma de ver o mundo. He traces the words wrestling tryouts with his finger, feeling the slight texture of the laser printer ink. In his mind, he can already hear the laughter that would erupt if he walked into that gymnasium. He can see Troy's smirk, Coach Reynolds' dismissive glance, the way conversations would stop and start again with barely contained amusement. But something else stirs in the quiet of that kitchen. Something that's been building during all those months of observation, all those hours of being underestimated and overlooked. It's not anger. Anger burns hot and quick. This is something cooler, more patient, something that whispers that being invisible has taught him things that visible people never learn. Outside his window, Jefferson High sits dark against the October sky, its windows reflecting streetlights like watching eyes. In 12 hours, those hallways will fill again with the familiar rhythms of teenage life. The wrestlers will swagger through their territory, claiming space with every step. Troy will hold court near the gymnasium entrance, his followers hanging on every casual observation. And somewhere in that familiar chaos, a decision will be made that will change everything. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of a cramped apartment, Elijah Carter folds the sign-up sheet carefully and places it between the pages of his history textbook, right next to a chapter about David and Goliath. The paper rustles softly as he closes the book, but the sound seems to echo with possibility. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. The basement gymnasium of Jefferson High exists in its own universe, governed by laws older than textbooks and more sacred than school policy. Here, beneath the main floor, where academic achievements are celebrated with paper certificates, a different kind of education unfolds on worn mats that have absorbed decades of sweat, tears, and dreams. Coach Reynolds stands at the center of this kingdom like a weathered general surveying his troops. At 57, his body tells the story of every season he's coached, every match he's fought, every championship that slipped through his fingers. His right knee clicks when he walks, a souvenir from his own wrestling days at State. And his shoulders carry the permanent hunch of someone who's spent 30 years leaning over mats, shouting corrections that fall on deaf ears. The walls around him bear witness to Jefferson's wrestling legacy. Faded photographs stretch across decades, showing teams posed in identical stances, their faces serious beneath dated haircuts. Championship banners hang like battle flags, their colors dulled by time and fluorescent lighting. In the corner, a trophy case displays the accumulated glory of generations. District championships, regional titles, and one lonely state runner-up trophy from 1987 that Coach Reynolds still stares at with a mixture of pride and regret. But this kingdom has a crown prince, and his name is Troy Maddox. At 17, Troy moves through the wrestling room with the casual arrogance of someone who's never known defeat. His shoulders stretch the fabric of his Jefferson Wrestling t-shirt, and his forearms carry the roadmap of countless hours spent grappling, lifting, and dominating. When he walks, conversations pause. When he speaks, teammates lean forward. When he steps onto the mat, even Coach Reynolds' perpetual scowl softens into something approaching respect. Troy's domain extends beyond the gymnasium walls. In the hallways, underclassmen step aside without being asked. In the cafeteria, his table expands and contracts based on his mood, seats filling and emptying according to his unspoken approval. Teachers know his name, not just because he's a star athlete, but because his presence commands attention in ways that good grades never could. His wrestling record speaks in numbers that have become legend: 47-0 in varsity competition, 3 consecutive district championships, and a legitimate shot at becoming Jefferson's first state champion in 37 years. College scouts already circle like hungry wolves, their business cards piling up in Coach Reynolds' office like autumn leaves. But Troy's true power lies not in his victories, but in his ability to shape the reality around him. When he decides someone doesn't belong, they don't belong. When he judges someone unworthy, the verdict becomes universal truth. His opinions ripple through Jefferson's social ecosystem with the force of natural law. The wrestling team's hierarchy mirrors Troy's worldview with surgical precision. Marcus D'Angelo, the team's 185-pound bruiser, serves as Troy's lieutenant, echoing his captain's judgments with religious devotion. Jake Hoffman and Chris Martinez occupy the next tier, talented enough to earn respect, but smart enough to never challenge the established order. Below them, the JV wrestlers and newcomers exist in a constant state of proving themselves, desperate for acknowledgement from the gods who rule their universe. Practice begins at 3:30 sharp, marked by the metallic clang of Coach Reynolds' whistle. The team assembles with military precision, forming neat rows on mats that smell of disinfectant and accumulated ambition. Warm-ups unfold in ritual repetition. Jumping jacks, push-ups, sprawls, and shots that have been performed in this exact sequence for so many years that they've become muscle memory. Coach Reynolds paces the edge of the mats, his eyes cataloging every movement, every effort, every sign of weakness. His voice cuts through the gymnasium air like a blade, sharp with decades of accumulated frustration. "Hoffman, your stance is garbage. You want to get taken down in the first 30 seconds? The criticism lands with practiced precision, designed to sting without crushing. "Martinez, where's your head? You're wrestling like you're thinking about your girlfriend." But when Troy executes the same moves, Coach Reynolds nods approvingly. When Troy offers suggestions to teammates, they're received like tactical briefings from a seasoned general. The double standard isn't hidden, it's celebrated, justified by results that speak louder than fairness. The practice room becomes a theater of controlled violence, where bodies slam against mats with thuds that echo off concrete walls. Sweat flies in microscopic droplets, creating a humid atmosphere that tastes of salt and determination. Grunts of exertion mix with the squeaking of wrestling shoes against vinyl surfaces, creating a soundtrack that sounds like organized warfare. Troy dominates every drill, every scrimmage, every moment of competition. When he grapples with Marcus, the 185-pounder who outweighs him by 15 pounds, Troy's technique overcomes raw strength with surgical precision. His movements flow like water, finding openings that exist for mere seconds before disappearing. When he locks in a hold, the match is over. Not because his opponents lack skill, but because they lack the killer instinct that separates champions from participants. That's how it's done, Coach Reynolds says, after Troy pins Jake Hoffman in 43 seconds. That's what championship wrestling looks like. The words hang in the air like gospel truth, absorbed by teammates who nod in reverent agreement. Troy accepts the praise with practiced modesty, but his eyes scan the room, cataloging who pays attention, who shows proper respect, who might need additional lessons in hierarchy. After practice, the team gathers in the locker room, where social dynamics play out with the same intensity as wrestling matches. Troy holds court from his corner locker, regaling teammates with stories of college recruiters and scholarship offers. His audience laughs at appropriate moments, asks questions that feed his ego, and maintains the careful balance of friendship and worship that keeps them in his inner circle. State championships aren't won by accident, Troy says, unlacing his wrestling shoes with deliberate care. They're won by teams that understand excellence, teams that don't accept mediocrity. His voice carries across the locker room, reaching every corner where lesser wrestlers change clothes in respectful silence. The message is clear, even when unspoken. Jefferson's wrestling program has room for champions and those who support champions. Everyone else is just taking up space. Coach Reynolds emerges from his office carrying a clipboard thick with tournament brackets and recruiting letters. His eyes sweep the locker room, taking inventory of his kingdom's resources. 23 wrestlers occupy various weight classes, from scrawny freshmen who look like they've never seen the inside of a weight room, to seasoned seniors who carry themselves like battle-tested veterans. Regionals are 8 weeks out, he announces, his voice cutting through conversations. State qualifiers follow 2 weeks later. This is where we separate the wheat from the chaff, gentlemen. This is where we find out who wants it and who just likes wearing the jersey. Troy straightens slightly, his attention sharpening. Marcus nods gravely. The underclassmen exchange nervous glances, suddenly aware that their positions on this team are more precarious than they'd imagined. We've got depth problems in the lower weights, Coach Reynolds continues. Injuries are piling up. Some of you are going to get opportunities you haven't earned yet. His eyes scan the room, lingering on faces that show doubt, fear, or insufficient hunger. The question is, what are you going to do with those opportunities? The locker room falls silent except for the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional slam of metal doors. In this moment, each wrestler contemplates his own reflection in the mirror of Coach Reynolds' expectations. Some see champions, some see also-rans. Most see question marks that will only be answered when the lights are brightest and the stakes are highest. But none of them, not Troy with his undefeated record, not Coach Reynolds with his decades of experience, not even the most optimistic underclassmen, imagine that their carefully constructed kingdom is about to face a challenge from someone they've never even noticed. In the hallway above, footsteps echo against polished floors as students head home, their backpacks heavy with homework and their minds occupied with teenage concerns. Among them, invisible as always, walks a boy carrying a folded piece of paper that will soon change everything. The wrestling room empties slowly, its occupants dispersing into the October afternoon, confident in their understanding of how the world works. Tomorrow will bring another practice, another opportunity to refine their hierarchy. Another day in a kingdom where strength rules and weakness finds no mercy, but kingdoms built on assumptions are more fragile than they appear. And sometimes, the greatest threats come from places where nobody thinks to look. The wrestling sign-up sheet appears on the bulletin board outside Coach Reynolds' office on a Tuesday morning, innocuous as a grocery list, but carrying the weight of dreams and disappointments. By lunch, it bears the signatures of familiar names, returning varsity wrestlers cementing their positions, JV hopefuls announcing their ambitions, and a handful of newcomers drawn by the promise of belonging to something larger than themselves. Elijah Carter approaches the board during the chaos of passing period, when hallways surge with bodies and conversations blend into white noise. His timing is deliberate. In the crush of students moving between classes, one more figure studying the bulletin board draws no attention. He reads each name twice, memorizing not just who signed up, but the handwriting itself, the confidence or hesitancy revealed in pen strokes and letter formations. The moment arrives with deceptive simplicity. Elijah uncaps a blue ballpoint pen, the cheap kind that sometimes skips, and writes his name at the bottom of the list. The letters appear smaller than those around them, as if trying to hide among the bold signatures of athletes who've already claimed their place in Jefferson's wrestling hierarchy. Elijah Carter. The ink takes a few seconds to dry completely, but in those brief moments, something fundamental shifts in the universe of Jefferson High. The change is invisible, unnoticed by the hundreds of students who pass the board throughout the day, but it exists nonetheless. A pebble dropped into still water, its ripples yet to reach the shore. Marcus D'Angelo notices first. He's checking the sign-up sheet during his free period, confirming that his name appears appropriately high on the list. When his eyes catch an unfamiliar signature at the bottom, he reads it once, twice, 3 times, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching amusement. "Troy," he calls across the hallway, his voice carrying a note of discovery. "Come look at this." Troy Maddox approaches with the casual stride of someone accustomed to being summoned for his opinion on matters of importance. His teammates often seek his judgment on everything from workout supplements to weekend plans, treating his preferences like commandments from a wrestling deity. "What's up?" Troy asks, his attention still partially focused on the college recruitment letter he's been reading, the latest in a stack that grows thicker each week. Marcus points to the bottom of the sign-up sheet, his finger hovering over Elijah's signature, like he's identifying evidence at a crime scene. "Look who thinks he's wrestler material." Troy's eyes follow Marcus's gesture, and for a moment, his face shows genuine confusion. The name means nothing to him initially. Elijah Carter exists so far outside his sphere of awareness that recognition takes several seconds to surface. "Wait," Troy says slowly, his brow furrowing with the effort of placing a face to the signature. "The skinny kid? The one who looks like a strong wind would blow him over?" "That's the one," Marcus confirms, and his voice carries the tone of someone sharing an particularly amusing joke. Apparently, he thinks he can hang with real wrestlers. The conversation attracts other teammates like iron filings to a magnet. Jake Hoffman abandons his locker combination mid-spin to join the discussion. Chris Martinez pauses in his animated description of weekend plans to focus on this unexpected development. Within minutes, a small crowd of wrestlers has gathered around the bulletin board, their voices blending into a chorus of disbelief and barely contained laughter. "Are we talking about the same Elijah Carter?" Jake asks, his tone suggesting they might be confusing this skinny nobody with some other more athletic Elijah Carter who attends a different school. "The guy who looks like he's 12 years old. He probably weighs 90 pounds soaking wet," Chris adds, shaking his head in amazement. "What weight class is he going to wrestle in? Featherweight? Paperweight?" The jokes flow with increasing creativity and decreasing kindness. Someone suggests that Elijah might have signed up by accident, mistaking wrestling tryouts for chess club registration. Another proposes that it's an elaborate prank, that the real Elijah Carter would never voluntarily subject himself to physical competition with actual athletes. Troy listens to the commentary with growing amusement, his initial confusion evolving into something approaching entertainment. In his world, confidence is earned through demonstrated ability, respect is purchased with victory, and hierarchy is maintained through the simple principle that champions decide who belongs and who doesn't. "This should be interesting," he says finally, his voice carrying the tone of someone anticipating a particularly entertaining spectacle. "I almost feel bad for the kid. almost. The word spreads through Jefferson's wrestling community with viral efficiency. By the end of the school day, every member of the team knows about Elijah's unexpected registration. The news travels through text messages, whispered conversations between classes, and animated discussions in the locker room after other sports practices conclude. Coach Reynolds discovers the development when he reviews the sign-up sheet before heading home, his eyes scanning the familiar names before stopping at the bottom entry. He stares at Elijah's signature for a long moment, his weathered face cycling through emotions that mirror his players' earlier reactions. Elijah Carter, he mutters to himself, the name triggering a vague recollection of a quiet kid who sometimes helps with equipment during study hall. The boy who's practically invisible, who speaks only when spoken to, who moves through the school like he's apologizing for taking up space. Coach Reynolds has seen this before, kids who sign up for wrestling because they want to prove something to themselves, to their peers, or to parents who think athletics might toughen them up. Most wash out during the first week of practice, overwhelmed by the physical demands and social pressure that come with stepping into a warrior's arena. But something about this particular name bothers him in a way he can't articulate. Maybe it's the careful penmanship, the way the letters seem deliberate rather than impulsive. Maybe it's the positioning at the bottom of the list, suggesting the signer waited until others had committed before adding his own name. Or maybe it's just the accumulated cynicism of a coach who's seen too many dreamers crash against the rocks of reality. The next morning brings renewed attention to Elijah's decision. Word has spread beyond the wrestling team into the broader ecosystem of Jefferson High, carried by the same gossip networks that disseminate information about breakups, party invitations, and academic scandals. In first-period English, Mrs. Patterson notices the subtle shift in classroom dynamics. Students who never paid attention to Elijah Carter now steal glances in his direction, their expressions mixing curiosity with barely concealed anticipation. The quiet boy in the corner has suddenly become interesting, not because he's done something remarkable, but because he's about to attempt something that everyone expects will end in spectacular failure. Elijah himself seems oblivious to the attention, maintaining his usual pattern of arriving early, taking notes with mechanical precision, and departing immediately when the bell rings. But those who watch carefully notice small changes, the way his shoulders seem slightly straighter, how his eyes occasionally lift from his notebook to meet someone's gaze before looking away. Lunch period transforms into an impromptu speculation session. Groups of students who normally focus on their own social dramas find themselves discussing the likelihood of Elijah surviving his first wrestling practice. The conversation spreads across cafeteria tables like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling. "I heard he's never even been in a fight," someone says, adding fictional details to fill gaps in actual knowledge. "My cousin tried wrestling freshman year," another voice chimes in, "quit after 3 days. Said it was like being tortured by people who enjoyed it. This kid's going to get destroyed. Someone should probably warn him." But nobody warns him. Instead, they wait with the patient anticipation of spectators gathering for a particularly brutal sporting event. The tragedy isn't malicious. Most of Jefferson's students aren't cruel by nature. It's simply the inevitable result of a social ecosystem where entertainment value often outweighs empathy, where someone else's potential humiliation becomes communal amusement. As the final bell rings and students stream toward exits, parking lots, and after-school activities, Elijah Carter makes his way toward the basement gymnasium. His backpack seems heavier than usual, weighed down not just by textbooks, but by the invisible pressure of expectations, none of them positive. Above him, Troy Maddox descends the same stairs with his usual confident stride, flanked by teammates who are already discussing how long they think the newcomer will last. Their voices echo off concrete walls, mixing anticipation with amusement, creating a soundtrack of impending humiliation. The gymnasium doors stand open like the entrance to an arena, fluorescent lights spilling into the hallway beyond. Inside, mats wait to receive their daily offering of sweat, struggle, and dreams. Coach Reynolds checks his watch and prepares to blow the whistle that will begin another practice, another step toward regional championships, another day in the carefully ordered universe he spent decades constructing. But today will be different. Today, the established order faces a challenge from the most unlikely source imaginable. And while everyone expects the confrontation to be brief and one-sided, nobody, not the coaches, not the teammates, not even Elijah himself, truly understands what's about to unfold on those worn mats. The whistle approaches Coach Reynolds' lips, its sharp blast moments away from beginning a practice that will change everything. But for now, in these final seconds of anticipation, Jefferson High's wrestling program exists in its last moments of certainty, its last breath of predictable hierarchy. What happens next will shatter assumptions that have stood for years. But first, everyone has to witness the spectacle they're expecting, the quick, merciful destruction of a dream that never should have been born. The first practice passes like a fever dream of humiliation and endurance. Elijah Carter arrives at Jefferson's wrestling room wearing basketball shorts that hang loose around his thin legs and a t-shirt that seems to emphasize every absent muscle. While veteran wrestlers warm up with fluid movements born from years of repetition, Elijah struggles through jumping jacks that look more like desperate flailing. Coach Reynolds watches with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable experiment. When Elijah attempts his first wrestling shot, a basic takedown that every wrestler learns before anything else, his form resembles a collapse more than an attack. Snickers ripple through the room like wind through autumn leaves. "Carter!" Coach Reynolds barks, his voice cutting through the gymnasium's humid air. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish with that, whatever that was?" Elijah straightens slowly, his face flushed with exertion and embarrassment. "A double-leg takedown, sir." "That wasn't a takedown. That was a controlled fall." The coach's words carry the weight of someone who's delivered similar verdicts countless times before. "Try again. Actually don't. Just observe for today." The verdict lands with brutal finality. For the remaining hour of practice, Elijah becomes a spectator in his own wrestling education, relegated to the sidelines while real wrestlers demonstrate the skills he lacks. He watches Troy execute perfect shots with liquid grace, sees Marcus power through sprawls that would leave lesser athletes gasping, observes the seamless coordination between partners who understand each other's movements instinctively. But Elijah doesn't leave. When practice ends and wrestlers file toward the locker room, their conversations already shifting to evening plans and weekend tournaments, Elijah lingers near the equipment room. He helps Coach Reynolds stack mats with careful precision, his movements deliberate despite the day's failures. The coach accepts the assistance with grudging acknowledgement, neither thanking nor dismissing the boy, who clearly doesn't belong. "You coming back tomorrow, Carter?" Coach Reynolds asks as he locks the equipment room door. The question carries no encouragement, just mild curiosity about how long this particular delusion will persist. "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question hangs in the air between them, echoing off concrete walls that have absorbed decades of similar conversations. Elijah considers his answer carefully, understanding that honesty might be the only currency he possesses in this transaction. "Because I want to learn," he says finally. Coach Reynolds studies the boy's face, searching for signs of sarcasm or hidden agenda. Finding neither, he shrugs and heads toward his office, leaving Elijah alone in the empty gymnasium. This becomes the pattern. Each practice brings fresh humiliation. Elijah arrives early and stays late, his presence tolerated rather than welcomed. During drills, he struggles with techniques that teammates execute instinctively. His shots lack power, his stance crumbles under pressure, and his conditioning leaves him gasping while others barely break a sweat. Troy's amusement evolves into active mockery. "Hey, stick figure!" he calls out during a particularly brutal drilling session, his voice carrying across the mat, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should try out for debate team instead. I hear they wrestle with ideas, not actual people." The locker room erupts in laughter that follows Elijah for the rest of practice. But something strange happens in the days that follow. While his teammates celebrate their wit, Elijah begins showing up earlier than anyone else. 5:30 a.m. The school sits empty, except for janitors finishing overnight shifts and security guards making final rounds. Elijah slips through a side entrance that maintenance keeps unlocked for early morning athletics, his footsteps echoing through hallways that won't see students for another 3 hours. The wrestling room exists in perfect silence at this hour, its mats cool to the touch and air, still heavy with yesterday's exertion. Elijah begins with basics, push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks performed with the methodical precision of someone who has time to perfect every movement. His body protests these early morning sessions, muscles aching from demands they've never faced, but he continues with mechanical determination. He studies wrestling videos on his phone, pausing and rewinding to analyze footwork, hand positioning, and timing. The screen's blue glow illuminates his face in the pre-dawn darkness as he memorizes sequences that championship wrestlers make look effortless. When he attempts these moves on empty mats, his execution remains clumsy, uncoordinated, but fractionally better than the day before. The solitude becomes his greatest advantage. Without teammates watching, without Coach Reynolds' disapproving glare, without Troy's casual cruelty, Elijah can fail without audience. Each stumble teaches him something new about balance. Each failed shot reveals details about timing and leverage that no amount of explanation could convey. By the time official practice begins at 3:30, Elijah has already completed his real training. He arrives, looking tired but determined, his hair still damp with sweat from morning workouts that no one knows about. His teammates assume his fatigue comes from struggling to keep up during regular practice, never imagining that he's already been training for 5 hours. The improvement is glacial, measured in millimeters rather than milestones. His stance becomes slightly more stable. His shots develop marginally better timing. His conditioning improves enough that he stops gasping for air during basic drills. These changes are so subtle that even Coach Reynolds doesn't notice them initially, but Elijah notices everything. 3 weeks into his wrestling education, he overhears Troy complaining about a nagging shoulder injury that he's hiding from coaches. During a water break, Elijah observes Marcus favoring his right ankle, probably the result of an old football injury that never healed properly. He catalogues Jake Hoffman's tendency to drop his left hand during scrambles, creating openings that skilled opponents could exploit. These observations become data points in a mental database that grows with each practice. While his teammates focus on their own performances, their own strengths and achievements, Elijah studies weakness. He memorizes tells, the subtle shifts in posture that telegraph certain moves, the breathing patterns that indicate fatigue, the split-second hesitations that reveal uncertainty. His notebook, originally intended for homework, becomes a wrestling journal filled with observations written in careful script. Troy always shoots when he's frustrated. Look for the shoulder dip. Marcus gets sloppy when he's tired. Attacks become predictable. Coach blows whistle exactly 47 seconds after water breaks end. The morning sessions evolve from basic conditioning to technical work. Elijah practices shots against imaginary opponents, his movements becoming smoother through sheer repetition. He studies leverage and physics, understanding that technique can compensate for strength, that timing can overcome speed, that knowledge can defeat natural talent. His mother notices the changes first, not in his wrestling, which she knows nothing about, but in his posture, his confidence, the way he carries himself through their small apartment. She doesn't ask questions. understanding intuitively that her son is engaged in some private battle that requires space to unfold. October slides toward November, with autumn leaves gathering in corners where wind deposits them. Wrestling season approaches like a distant storm, its pressure building in conversations about weight classes, tournament schedules, and championship aspirations. The team's hierarchy remains unchanged. Troy at the apex, his lieutenants arranged below him in careful order, newcomers relegated to the margins. But something else is building in those early morning hours when Jefferson High sits empty, except for one determined figure drilling moves on mats that echo with each footfall. Something patient and methodical, growing stronger through repetition and fed by every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being underestimated. Coach Reynolds still barely notices Elijah during practice, his attention focused on wrestlers who might actually contribute to the team's success. Troy continues his casual mockery, though with slightly less enthusiasm as the novelty wears off. Teammates treat Elijah like furniture, present but unremarkable, tolerated but not acknowledged. None of them understand that invisible people see everything. None of them realize that being underestimated can become a weapon. None of them imagine that while they sleep comfortably in their beds, someone else is awake, working, preparing for a moment that will change everything. The wrestling room keeps its secrets in those pre-dawn hours, its silence broken only by the sound of determination refusing to quit. And in that solitude, something dangerous is being forged, not from natural talent or obvious strength, but from the far more potent combination of discipline, observation, and the quiet fury of being constantly dismissed. Practice ends as it always does, with Elijah helping stack mats while teammates head home to comfortable lives. But tonight feels different somehow, charged with possibility that hovers just beyond recognition. The season is coming, and with it, opportunities that no one expects and nobody to seize. But nobodies who work in shadows while others sleep sometimes surprise the world in ways that champions never see coming. December arrives at Jefferson High like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it the biting cold that seeps through gymnasium walls and the mounting pressure of championship season. The wrestling team's daily routine intensifies as regional qualifiers loom just 3 weeks away, close enough to taste, distant enough to breed anxiety in wrestlers who understand that their entire season hinges on performances yet to come. Coach Reynolds posts the tentative lineup on his office door, each weight class carefully calculated to maximize the team's scoring potential. Troy Maddox's name appears at 160 pounds in bold letters, his position as unquestioned as gravity. Marcus D'Angelo claims 185, Jake Hoffman secures 145, and the remaining slots fill with wrestlers who've earned their spots through combination of talent, seniority, and Coach Reynolds' pragmatic assessment of who gives Jefferson the best chance to advance. Elijah Carter's name appears nowhere on the list. This surprises exactly no one. After 3 months of practice, Elijah remains what he's always been, an enthusiastic participant whose presence is tolerated rather than valued. His technique has improved marginally. His conditioning shows modest gains, but improvement measured against his own baseline still leaves him light years behind wrestlers who've dedicated their lives to the sport. Yet Elijah continues his shadow routine, arriving each morning at 5:30 to work alone in the empty gymnasium. His movements have acquired a fluid quality that would surprise his teammates if they witnessed it, his shots developing precision born from thousands of repetitions. He's memorized every creak in the floorboards, every angle of light that filters through dirty windows, every sound that echoes through Jefferson's halls in those pre-dawn hours. The injury happens on a Wednesday. Danny Morrison, Jefferson's 135-pound wrestler, goes down during a seemingly routine drilling session. The sound of his knee hyperextending carries across the mat like a gunshot, followed immediately by a scream that silences every conversation in the room. Coach Reynolds rushes to Danny's side, his weathered face cycling through emotions as he assesses the damage. "Get the trainer!" He barks to no one in particular, his voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes from seeing too many promising seasons end in single moments of bad luck. The diagnosis arrives 2 days later via a phone call that Coach Reynolds takes in his office while the team stretches before practice. Through the thin walls, wrestlers catch fragments of conversation that tell the story without details. 8 weeks minimum, surgery, done for the season. When Coach Reynolds emerges, his expression carries the weight of a man watching his championship aspirations crumble. Danny Morrison was supposed to be their anchor at 135 pounds, experienced enough to score crucial points in close matches, reliable enough to build team strategy around. His absence creates a hole in the lineup that mathematics can't solve. "Morrison's done," Coach Reynolds announces, his words landing in the wrestling room like stones dropped into still water. "Torn ACL, possible meniscus damage. He won't be back this season." The team absorbs this information with the stoic acceptance of athletes who understand that injury is always one wrong step away. But beneath their composed exteriors, calculations begin immediately. Who moves up in weight? Who gets promoted from JV? How does this change their realistic expectations for regionals? Phillips. Coach Reynolds calls to the team's backup 135-pounder, a junior with decent technique but questionable mental toughness. "You're moving up to varsity. Don't make me regret this decision." Phillips nods eagerly, his face mixing excitement with terror in proportions that don't inspire confidence. He's wrestled JV for 2 years, compiling a respectable but unspectacular record against competition that wouldn't survive 5 minutes against regional-level opponents. But even this promotion doesn't solve Coach Reynolds' fundamental problem. Jefferson's JV program lacks depth, thinned by academic eligibility issues, and the annual exodus of wrestlers who discover that off-season training requires more dedication than they're willing to invest. Moving Phillips up to varsity creates another hole, this one at the JV level, where the team needs bodies to fill tournament lineups. The solution presents itself during Friday's practice, delivered via an assistant coach who bursts through the gymnasium doors like he's carrying urgent news from the front lines of war. "Coach," he calls, slightly out of breath from running across campus. "Peterson just broke his wrist in auto shop. Doctor says he's out for 6 weeks minimum." Peterson wrestles 130 pounds on JV, not a star, but a reliable competitor who shows up, works hard, and occasionally surprises opponents with better-than-expected performances. His injury compounds Coach Reynolds' personnel crisis, leaving gaps in both varsity and JV lineups that simple arithmetic can't bridge. Coach Reynolds stares at his clipboard like it might reveal solutions through sheer force of will. His pen taps against the metal backing in a rhythm that matches his elevated heart rate, each tap marking another second of championship ambitions slipping away due to circumstances beyond his control. The wrestling room falls silent, except for the distant hum of heating systems struggling against December's bitter cold. 22 wrestlers wait for guidance from a coach who spent 30 years solving problems that seemed impossible until they became routine. But this problem feels different, more fundamental than tactical adjustments or motivational speeches can address. "We need bodies," Coach Reynolds mutters, speaking to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Warm bodies, cold bodies, I don't care. We need wrestlers who can fill spots and not embarrass the program." His eyes scan the assembled team, cataloging options with the desperate pragmatism of a general facing impossible odds. The varsity wrestlers are locked into their positions. Moving Troy or Marcus or Jake would create more problems than it would solve. The remaining JV competitors represent the full extent of Jefferson's wrestling depth, which suddenly appears alarmingly shallow. That's when Coach Reynolds' gaze settles on Elijah Carter. Elijah sits cross-legged at the edge of the mat, having finished his assigned conditioning early, while others struggle through exercises that would have destroyed him 3 months ago. His improvement over the season has been steady, if unremarkable. From catastrophically bad to merely below average, from unable to complete basic drills to capable of participating without embarrassing himself. More importantly, Elijah weighs exactly 127 pounds, which slots him perfectly into the weight class that Peterson's injury has left vacant. "Carter," Coach Reynolds calls, his voice carrying a tone that Elijah has never heard directed at him before. Not dismissive, not annoyed, but actually considering him as a potential solution to a real problem. Elijah looks up, his expression cautiously hopeful. After months of being treated like wrestling room furniture, being directly addressed feels like receiving an unexpected invitation to rejoin the human race. "You still weighing in around 127? "Yes, sir." Coach Reynolds studies him with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating livestock. Elijah's frame remains slight, his muscle mass modest, his overall appearance suggesting someone who could be snapped in half by a strong handshake. But desperate circumstances create flexible standards, and Coach Reynolds needs someone, anyone, who can fill a uniform and represent Jefferson without completely humiliating the program. "How do you feel about wrestling JV regionals?" The question hangs in the air like a miracle disguised as an emergency measure. Every wrestler in the room understands what's being offered, not respect, not recognition of talent, but simple necessity creating opportunity. Elijah is being asked to serve as human sacrifice, a body to fill a tournament bracket that requires exact numbers of participants. But opportunity rarely arrives wearing the clothes you expect. "I'd be honored, Coach," Elijah responds, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what's being proposed. Around him, teammates exchange glances that mix surprise with barely concealed amusement. The idea of Elijah Carter representing Jefferson in actual competition seems less like a solution and more like elaborate performance art. Troy Maddox can't suppress a snort of laughter. "This should be interesting," he says, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope you've got good insurance, stick figure." But Coach Reynolds is already moving past the decision, his mind focused on damage control and realistic expectations. "You'll get destroyed," he tells Elijah with brutal honesty. "Regional competition is nothing like practice. These kids have been wrestling since they were 5 years old. They'll eat you alive." "I understand, sir. Your job is simple. Don't get pinned in the first 30 seconds. Make them work for it. Show some heart, represent the program with dignity, and maybe, you'll learn something that helps you next season." The terms are clear. Elijah Carter is being promoted to sacrificial lamb. His role is to absorb punishment while giving Jefferson's JV team the minimum number of wrestlers required for tournament participation. He's expected to lose quickly, gracefully, and without embarrassing the coaching staff who made this desperate decision. What Coach Reynolds doesn't realize is that some sacrifices refuse to stay dead. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the tournament is the one nobody expects to survive past the first round. Regional qualifiers are 18 days away. In the wrestling world, that's simultaneously forever and no time at all, enough time to refine technique, not nearly enough to transform a novice into a legitimate competitor. But 18 days can contain miracles, especially when those days begin at 5:30 a.m. in an empty gymnasium where impossible things practice becoming inevitable. The Riverside Regional Wrestling Tournament transforms Jefferson High's rival gymnasium into a cathedral of competition, where 18 years of dreams converge in a single day that will separate champions from footnotes. The air thrums with nervous energy as wrestlers from 12 schools warm up on mats that will soon witness moments of triumph and heartbreak in equal measure. Elijah Carter sits in Section C of the bleachers, watching the 127-pound weight class bracket unfold with the detached fascination of someone observing his own execution. His name appears on the tournament board in small print, positioned as the 16 seed, dead last, expected to provide little more than a first-round victory for whichever unfortunate opponent draws him in the opening round. That opponent is Marcus Rodriguez from Valley Prep, a compact wrestler with the build of someone who spent his entire life conditioning his body for exactly this moment. Rodriguez stretches with fluid movements that speak of countless hours on wrestling mats, his warm-up routine polished to the efficiency of a well-rehearsed ballet. When he glances toward Elijah, his expression carries the mild annoyance of someone who knows he's being served an appetizer when he came for a meal. Coach Reynolds sits 3 rows down, clipboard balanced on his knee, as he tracks Jefferson's various matches throughout the tournament. His attention focuses primarily on Troy Maddox, who dominates the 160-pound bracket with surgical precision, dismantling opponents with combinations that flow like water, finding the path of least resistance. Carter's up in 10 minutes, the assistant coach mentions, checking his watch against the tournament schedule. You want me to give him the standard speech? Coach Reynolds considers this question with the weariness of someone who's delivered countless pre-match talks to wrestlers who stand no realistic chance of victory. The standard speech emphasizes effort over outcome, heart over skill, and the character-building value of giving maximum effort even in certain defeat. "Let me handle it," he says finally, rising from his seat, with the deliberate movements of someone whose body carries decades of accumulated athletic wear. Elijah waits in the designated warm-up area, going through stretching motions that have become ritual over the past 4 months. His movements lack the fluid confidence of wrestlers around him, but they carry something else, a focused intensity that suggests he's not just preparing his body, but calibrating his mind for what's about to unfold. Carter. Coach Reynolds approaches with the expression of a doctor about to deliver terminal diagnosis with maximum compassion. "You ready for this?" "Yes, sir." "Remember what we talked about. Don't try to be something you're not. Wrestling is about heart as much as technique. Show them you belong here, even if you don't win." The words are meant to be encouraging, but they carry the unmistakable subtext of managed expectations. Coach Reynolds has seen enough wrestling to recognize when a mismatch approaches the level of athletic cruelty. His primary concern isn't victory. That ship sailed the moment Elijah's name went on the bracket, but rather ensuring that his wrestler emerges from this experience without physical injury or psychological devastation. What Coach Reynolds doesn't see, what none of Jefferson's coaching staff notices, is the way Elijah's eyes move across the warm-up area. While other wrestlers focus inward, preparing themselves mentally for their upcoming matches, Elijah catalogs everything. Rodriguez's tendency to favor his left leg during stretching, the slight hesitation in his right shoulder during arm circles, the pattern of his breathing that suggests nervousness disguised as confidence. Mat 4, 127 pounds. First round. The announcer's voice echoes through the gymnasium, cutting through the white noise of multiple conversations and creating a moment of focused attention. Rodriguez, Valley Prep versus Carter, Jefferson High. The walk to the mat feels like a journey through hostile territory. Spectators from both schools line the edges, their attention drawn more by curiosity than expectation. Valley Prep supporters anticipate a quick victory that will advance their wrestler toward more meaningful competition. Jefferson fans prepare to witness what they assume will be merciful destruction, hoping only that their representative won't embarrass himself completely. Rodriguez bounces on his toes as he approaches the center circle, his movements loose and confident. He's wrestled this scenario dozens of times, overmatched opponents thrown into regional competition to fill brackets, hopeful underdogs who lack the experience and conditioning to compete at this level. His strategy is straightforward. Establish dominance early, secure a quick takedown, and advance to the next round without wasting unnecessary energy. Elijah approaches the center with different energy entirely. His movements appear calm, almost meditative, lacking the nervous energy that typically characterizes first-time tournament wrestlers. When he shakes Rodriguez's hand, the grip is firm but not challenging, respectful but not submissive. The referee positions himself between the wrestlers, his zebra-striped shirt marking him as neutral arbiter in what everyone expects will be a brief and one-sided contest. Gentlemen, you know the rules. Keep it clean, wrestle hard, and listen to my commands. Questions? Both wrestlers shake their heads. Take your positions. They crouch in starting stances that reveal the vast gulf in their experience. Rodriguez settles into a perfect athletic position, his weight distributed precisely, his hands positioned for optimal shot angles. Elijah's stance appears adequate but unremarkable, the product of 4 months of practice rather than a lifetime of refinement. The whistle pierces the gymnasium's noise like a blade cutting silk. Rodriguez explodes forward immediately, attempting a double-leg takedown that has secured victories in countless previous matches. His technique is textbook perfect. Head positioned correctly, hands clasped with iron grip, driving power generated from legs that have been conditioned for exactly this purpose. But something impossible happens in the space between Rodriguez's shot and its expected completion. Elijah isn't there, not entirely absent, but shifted just enough that Rodriguez's perfect technique finds empty air where a body should have been. The adjustment appears minimal, almost accidental, but it transforms Rodriguez's attacking advantage into awkward overextension that leaves him vulnerable for precisely 1/4 of a second. In wrestling, a quarter second is eternity. Elijah's counter comes not from strength or speed, but from positioning so precise it seems choreographed. His hands find Rodriguez's wrists at the exact moment when the Valley Prep wrestler is most committed to his attack, most unable to defend against unexpected pressure applied from unexpected angles. The takedown happens so quickly that spectators require several seconds to process what they've witnessed. Rodriguez, the experienced competitor with superior conditioning and perfect technique, finds himself on his back, with Elijah controlling his wrists and maintaining perfect positioning that prevents any chance of escape. The gymnasium falls silent, except for the sound of bodies moving against vinyl mats, and the referee's voice counting 1, 2, 3. At 15 seconds, Rodriguez begins to panic. The effortless dominance he expected has evaporated, replaced by the terrifying realization that his opponent possesses skills that don't match his appearance or reputation. He attempts to bridge, to roll, to use his superior strength to power out of trouble, but each movement only tightens Elijah's control. 10, 11, 12. The crowd's silence transforms into something approaching shock. Valley Prep supporters stare in disbelief as their wrestler, a legitimate regional contender, struggles helplessly against someone they dismissed as tournament fodder. Jefferson fans hold their collective breath, afraid that acknowledging what they're seeing might somehow break the spell. 18, 19, 20. Rodriguez's struggles grow more desperate, his conditioning beginning to fail under the stress of extended defensive wrestling. Elijah maintains his position with mechanical precision, adjusting pressure and leverage with movements so subtle they appear instinctive rather than calculated. At 28 seconds, Rodriguez's shoulders settle flat against the mat with the finality of a door closing. Pin, victory, Carter, Jefferson High. The referee raises Elijah's hand in a gesture that transforms him from sacrificial lamb to legitimate competitor in the space of a single breath. Around the gymnasium, conversations stop mid-sentence as spectators process the impossibility of what they've just witnessed. Coach Reynolds stares at the mat with an expression that cycles through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching wonder. In 30 years of coaching, he's seen upsets, surprises, and unlikely victories, but he's never seen a wrestler who shouldn't belong completely dominate someone who clearly should. Troy Maddox, having finished his own first-round victory, approaches the mat just in time to witness Elijah's hand being raised. His face shows the particular kind of shock reserved for moments when fundamental assumptions about the world prove catastrophically wrong. But perhaps the most stunned person in the entire gymnasium is Elijah Carter himself. Not because he won, somewhere in his mind he'd always believed this moment was possible, but because winning feels exactly like he thought it would. Not triumphant or celebratory, but simply like the natural conclusion to months of preparation that no one else knew was happening. He walks off the mat with the same quiet demeanor he's carried throughout his wrestling education, giving no indication that he's just announced himself as a legitimate threat in a tournament where everyone expected him to be eliminated before lunch. The second round pairings go up 20 minutes later, and Elijah Carter's name appears in position to face the 8 seed, a wrestler who was supposed to meet Rodriguez in what everyone expected would be a competitive match between evenly matched opponents. Instead, that wrestler will face a ghost who learned to wrestle in shadows, who trained when others slept, and who just proved that being underestimated can be the most dangerous advantage of all. But this is only the beginning. The tournament has 7 more rounds, each one featuring opponents with more experience, better technique, and stronger motivation than the last. What happened against Rodriguez might have been a fluke, a single moment when preparation met opportunity under perfect circumstances, or it might have been the first glimpse of something that will change everything anyone thought they knew about wrestling, about talent, and about the quiet boy who spent 4 months learning lessons that everyone else missed. The tournament continues, but Jefferson High's wrestling program will never be the same. The second round brings Kevin Walsh from Northside Academy, a wrestler whose reputation precedes him like thunder before lightning. Walsh carries himself with the casual confidence of someone who's never questioned his place in the sports hierarchy. District runner-up last season, early favorite for this year's regional championship. College scouts already circling with scholarship offers that could change his family's financial future. He approaches the center circle expecting routine maintenance, a tune-up match against Jefferson's mystery wrestler, before advancing to rounds where real competition awaits. Walsh has studied the bracket obsessively, memorizing potential matchups and calculating the path to his inevitable championship. But he spent exactly 0 seconds preparing for Elijah Carter, because nobody prepares for opponents who aren't supposed to matter. The warm-up period reveals the gulf between their backgrounds. Walsh moves through stretching routines with the fluid precision of someone who's performed these same movements thousands of times, his body responding to mental commands with mechanical perfection. His supporters, family members wearing Northside Academy t-shirts, teammates who've traveled to witness his expected coronation, fill 3 rows of bleachers with confident energy. Elijah stretches in relative solitude, his preparation routine unchanged, despite the magnitude of what he's already accomplished. Coach Reynolds hovers nearby, his expression mixing pride with protective concern. The first-round victory against Rodriguez has elevated expectations from "please don't get injured" to "maybe he won't embarrass us completely." But realistic assessment still suggests that Walsh represents a different level of challenge entirely. "Carter," Coach Reynolds says quietly as match time approaches, "Walsh is good, really good. Don't let the first win go to your head. Stay focused, wrestle your match, and whatever happens, you've already exceeded every expectation anyone had." The words carry encouragement, wrapped in warning. Coach Reynolds has seen enough upset victories to understand their psychological danger. Wrestlers who surprise themselves with early success often lose focus when facing superior competition, their attention shifting from technique to the impossibility of what they're attempting. But Elijah's response suggests his mental approach hasn't changed, despite his elevated circumstances. "Yes, sir, I understand." What Coach Reynolds doesn't understand is that Elijah's preparation for this tournament began 4 months ago in pre-dawn sessions, when Jefferson High sat empty. Every movement Walsh makes during warm-ups gets catalogued, analyzed, compared against mental files that Elijah has been building since his first day in the wrestling room. Walsh favors his right leg slightly. Old injury, probably a sprained ankle that never quite healed properly. His left shoulder sits marginally higher than his right, suggesting muscle compensation patterns that create minor but exploitable imbalances. His breathing pattern shows the controlled rhythm of superior conditioning, but also reveals the slight acceleration that indicates pre-match nerves disguised as confidence. Mat 4, second round, 127 pounds. The announcer's voice cuts through gymnasium noise with official authority. Walsh, Northside Academy versus Carter, Jefferson High. The walk to the mat carries different energy than Elijah's first match. Spectators who ignored him completely 2 hours ago now watch with curiosity mixed with skepticism. The Rodriguez victory could have been a fluke, a moment when everything aligned perfectly for an overmatched wrestler who got lucky once and won't get lucky again. Walsh settles into his stance with the comfortable arrogance of someone who's dominated this weight class for 2 years. His positioning is textbook perfect. His mental approach focused, but not intense. He's treating this match like a scheduled workout, an opportunity to fine-tune technique before facing opponents who require his full attention. The referee checks both wrestlers, ensures their headgear is properly secured, and positions himself for optimal viewing angle. Gentlemen, you know the rules. Keep it clean. Listen to my commands. Questions? Neither wrestler responds. Take your positions. The starting stances reveal the same disparity as before. Walsh's perfect athletic positioning against Elijah's adequate but unremarkable crouch. But something in Elijah's eyes suggests that adequate might be enough, that 4 months of observation and preparation have taught him things that perfect technique can't overcome. The whistle sounds like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Walsh's attack comes immediately, a lightning-fast, single-leg attempt that demonstrates why college scouts already consider him scholarship material. His technique is flawless, his execution precise, his follow-through showing the kind of finishing ability that separates good wrestlers from great ones. But again, Elijah isn't quite where Walsh expects him to be. The adjustment is minimal, a quarter step backward, a slight shift in weight distribution, but it transforms Walsh's perfect attack into overextension that leaves him vulnerable for the briefest moment. Elijah's counter doesn't come from superior strength or speed, but from positioning so precise it seems prophetic. His hands find Walsh's ankle at the exact instant when the North Side wrestler is most committed to his attack, applying pressure that turns offensive momentum into defensive crisis. Walsh's superior conditioning and experience should allow him to recover from this temporary disadvantage, but something about Elijah's control feels different. Not stronger, but more precise, more inevitable. The scramble that follows defies easy explanation. Walsh uses every technique in his considerable arsenal, applying strength and leverage that should overwhelm a novice wrestler. But each attempt to escape only tightens Elijah's control. Each burst of energy only accelerates Walsh's exhaustion. At 90 seconds, Walsh begins to panic. The effortless dominance he's maintained for 2 years evaporates as he finds himself controlled by someone who shouldn't possess the skills or conditioning to compete at this level. His breathing becomes labored, his movements less crisp, his tactical decisions increasingly desperate. Elijah maintains control with mechanical precision, adjusting pressure and leverage with movements so subtle they appear instinctive. When Walsh attempts to stand, Elijah's positioning prevents it. When Walsh tries to roll, Elijah anticipates the direction and counters before the movement begins. The crowd's energy shifts from curious observation to genuine amazement. Northside supporters watch in growing disbelief as their champion struggles helplessly against an opponent they'd never heard of before today. Jefferson fans hold their breath, afraid that acknowledging what they're witnessing might somehow break whatever spell their wrestler has cast. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Walsh's shoulders settle against the mat with devastating finality. Pin! Victory, Carter, Jefferson High. The referee's announcement echoes through a gymnasium that has fallen silent except for the sound of shocked breathing. Walsh stares at the ceiling with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality has just been shattered. 2 hours ago, he was a legitimate regional championship contender. Now he's been eliminated by a wrestler who wasn't supposed to survive the first round. Elijah rises from the mat with the same quiet demeanor he's maintained throughout his wrestling education. No celebration, no demonstration of emotion, just the calm acknowledgement of work completed as expected. When the referee raises his hand, he accepts the gesture with polite gratitude rather than triumphant satisfaction. Coach Reynolds stands frozen in place, his clipboard forgotten as he processes what he's just witnessed. In 30 years of coaching, he's seen upsets that surprised everyone. But he's never seen a wrestler systematically dismantle superior competition, using techniques that don't appear in any coaching manual he's ever studied. The revelation hits him like cold water. Elijah Carter isn't getting lucky. He's executing a game plan that no one else understands, using skills that no one else knew he possessed, demonstrating preparation that extends far beyond anything that happened during official practice sessions. Troy Maddox approaches the mat area with an expression that cycles through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching concern. The social hierarchy that has defined Jefferson High's wrestling program for years suddenly appears less stable, its foundations challenged by someone who was supposed to remain invisible. "What the hell is happening?" Marcus D'Angelo whispers, voicing the question that everyone is thinking but no one wants to ask out loud. The third-round pairings appear on the tournament board 15 minutes later, and Elijah Carter's name sits in position to face the 4 seed, a wrestler who was supposed to meet Walsh in what everyone expected would be a competitive semi-final match. Instead, he'll face a ghost who learned to wrestle in shadows, who trained when others slept, and who just proved that 4 months of underestimation can forge weapons that championship pedigree can't defend against. But the tournament is far from over. 3 more rounds separate Elijah from the regional championship that seemed impossible when the day began. Each subsequent opponent will be stronger, faster, more experienced and more desperate as they realize that their carefully planned paths to glory are being dismantled by someone who wasn't supposed to be a factor. The gymnasium buzzes with conversations that revolve around a single question: who is Elijah Carter, and where did he learn to wrestle like that? But the answers to those questions exist in pre-dawn hours when gymnasiums sit empty, in notebooks filled with observations that no one else bothered to make, and in the quiet determination of someone who decided that being invisible was just another form of preparation. What happens next will determine whether today represents a miraculous fluke or the announcement of something that will change Jefferson High's wrestling program forever. The only certainty is that nothing will ever be the same. And somewhere in the stands, Troy Maddox watches his carefully ordered world begin to crumble, one impossible victory at a time. The championship match arrives like inevitability disguised as impossibility. 7 hours after entering the tournament as the 16 seed expected to lose immediately, Elijah Carter stands at the edge of mat 4, preparing to face Jackson Mills from Riverside Academy, the defending regional champion, the 1 seed, the wrestler who has dominated this weight class for 2 consecutive years with surgical precision. Mills carries himself with the absolute confidence of someone who has never been seriously challenged. His warm-up routine flows with practiced efficiency, while his supporters, college scouts, family members, teammates who worship his technique, fill entire sections of bleachers with anticipatory energy. His path through the tournament has been flawless, 3 pins, 1 technical fall, and a semi-final victory so dominant that his opponent requested injury timeout just to escape further punishment. By contrast, Elijah's journey reads like fiction. 6 victories over increasingly desperate opponents, each match ending with the same impossible result. Perfect technique, overwhelming superior athletes through positioning so precise it appears choreographed. Wrestling coaches from other schools huddle in confused discussions, trying to identify where this unknown wrestler trained, who taught him skills that don't appear in any curriculum they recognize. Coach Reynolds stands near the corner of the mat, his expression cycling through emotions that have no names. Pride wars with disbelief, excitement battles with protective concern, and underneath everything runs a current of fear that this miraculous run might end in devastating fashion against competition that represents an entirely different level of wrestling excellence. "Carter," he says quietly as match time approaches, "Mills is everything Walsh was, but better, stronger, faster, more experienced. He's never lost a match at regionals, never even been seriously challenged." Elijah listens with the same focused attention he's maintained throughout the tournament, his expression revealing nothing of what's happening behind his eyes. Around him, the gymnasium energy builds toward crescendo as spectators from 12 schools realize they're about to witness something extraordinary. Either the completion of the most unlikely championship run in regional history, or the brutal reality check that restores natural order to their wrestling universe. "Whatever happens," Coach Reynolds continues, "you've already accomplished something impossible. Don't let anyone tell you different." But Elijah's response suggests that impossible has become his baseline expectation. "Yes, sir, I understand." What Coach Reynolds still doesn't grasp is that this tournament represents the culmination of preparation that began long before anyone noticed Elijah existed. Every movement Mills makes during warm-ups gets compared against mental files that have been building for months, catalogued observations that reveal patterns invisible to everyone else. Mills favors explosive attacks, powerful but predictable, relying on superior conditioning to overwhelm opponents who can't match his pace. His technique is flawless within narrow parameters, but those parameters create exploitable limitations for someone who's studied them carefully enough. His confidence, while well-earned, has created blind spots that become vulnerabilities when faced with opponents who don't behave according to established patterns. The crowd falls silent as both wrestlers approach the center circle. Mills bounces on his toes with casual arrogance, his movements loose and confident. He's wrestled this scenario dozens of times, regional championship matches where victory is expected, where the only question is margin of dominance rather than outcome. Elijah approaches with different energy entirely. His movements appear calm, almost meditative, carrying the focused intensity of someone who has prepared for this exact moment with methodical precision. When he shakes Mills's hand, the grip is firm but not challenging, respectful but not intimidated. "Gentlemen," the referee positions himself between them, "this is for the regional championship. You know the rules. Keep it clean, wrestle hard, listen to my commands. Questions?" Both wrestlers shake their heads. The gymnasium holds its collective breath as they settle into starting positions. Mills crouches in perfect athletic stance, his weight distributed for maximum explosive potential. Elijah's positioning appears adequate but unremarkable, the same crouch he's used throughout the tournament that somehow produces results that defy logical explanation. "Wrestlers ready?" They nod. The whistle pierces absolute silence. Mills explodes forward with devastating speed, attempting a double-leg takedown that has secured every significant victory in his championship career. His technique is textbook perfect, his power overwhelming, his execution timed to catch opponents before they can react to his legendary speed. But for the 7th time today, Elijah isn't quite where his opponent expects him to be. The adjustment is minimal. A quarter-step shift that transforms Mills' perfect attack into awkward overextension. But this time, something different happens in the space between attack and counter. Mills recognizes the danger immediately, his championship experience allowing him to abort his attack and reset to neutral position before Elijah can capitalize on temporary advantage. "Smart wrestling," the referee murmurs approvingly as both wrestlers circle each other with renewed respect. Mills's expression shows the first crack in his absolute confidence. The takedown attempt that has never failed just encountered resistance that shouldn't exist. His tactical approach shifts immediately from overwhelming dominance to careful probing, testing this unknown opponent for weaknesses that must exist somewhere. The next exchange reveals the true nature of what spectators are witnessing. Mills attempts a series of attacks. Shots, throws, tactical adjustments that demonstrate why college scouts consider him scholarship material. Each attempt is technically perfect, executed with championship-level skill and conditioning. But Elijah counters everything, not with superior strength or speed, but with positioning so precise it seems prophetic. His defensive adjustments appear effortless. His counters flow like water finding natural channels. His control over distance and timing suggests understanding that extends beyond technical knowledge into something approaching art. At 2 minutes, Mills begins to show signs of frustration. His attacks become more aggressive, his tactical decisions less patient. The effortless dominance that has defined his career suddenly feels elusive, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that his opponent possesses skills that don't match any wrestling style he's ever encountered. The crowd senses the shift in momentum like animals sensing approaching storm. Mills supporters watch with growing concern as their champion struggles against resistance that shouldn't exist. Jefferson fans hold their breath, afraid that acknowledging what they're seeing might somehow break whatever spell their wrestler has cast. At 4 minutes, something extraordinary happens. Mills, the defending champion who has never lost a regional match, finds himself taken down by a wrestler who wasn't supposed to survive the first round. The takedown comes not from explosive power or superior technique, but from positioning so perfect it appears choreographed. Elijah's hands find Mills's wrists at precisely the moment when the champion is most committed to his attack, applying leverage that transforms offensive momentum into defensive crisis. Mills hits the mat with the sound of reality fracturing. Around the gymnasium, spectators rise to their feet in involuntary response to witnessing something that transcends sport and approaches miracle. The defending champion, the wrestler who has dominated this weight class for 2 years, finds himself controlled by someone who 4 months ago couldn't execute a basic takedown. The final 2 minutes unfold like systematic dismantling of everything that wrestling experts thought they understood about talent, preparation, and natural ability. Mills uses every technique in his championship arsenal, applies conditioning that should overwhelm any high school wrestler, demonstrates mental toughness that has carried him through 2 years of regional dominance. But nothing works. Elijah maintains control with mechanical precision, adjusting pressure and leverage with movements so subtle they appear instinctive. When Mills attempts to escape, Elijah anticipates the direction and counters before the movement begins. When Mills tries to use superior strength, Elijah's positioning makes strength irrelevant. At 6 minutes and 37 seconds, Jackson Mills's shoulders settle against the mat with devastating finality. Pin, regional champion Carter Jefferson High. The referee's announcement triggers an explosion of noise that threatens to lift the gymnasium roof. Jefferson supporters erupt in celebration that borders on religious experience, their voices carrying disbelief mixed with pure joy. Even neutral spectators find themselves cheering for something that transcends team loyalty and approaches universal appreciation for witnessing the impossible. Elijah rises from the mat with the same quiet demeanor he's maintained throughout the tournament. No celebration, no demonstration of emotion, just calm acknowledgement of work completed as expected. When the referee raises his hand and places the regional championship medal around his neck, he accepts both gestures with polite gratitude rather than triumphant satisfaction. Mills stares at the ceiling with an expression that cycles through shock, disbelief, and grudging respect. In 7 years of competitive wrestling, he's never been dominated so completely by anyone, let alone by someone he'd never heard of before today. But perhaps the most stunned person in the entire gymnasium is Troy Maddox. The Jefferson wrestling captain stands at the edge of the mat, watching a teammate he'd dismissed as worthless receive recognition that Troy has spent 4 years trying to achieve. The social hierarchy that has defined his high school experience crumbles around him like a house built on quicksand. Coach Reynolds approaches with tears in his eyes, his weathered face unable to contain emotions that have no precedent in 30 years of coaching. He embraces Elijah with the fierce affection of someone who has just witnessed their fundamental understanding of athletic potential proven catastrophically wrong. "How?" he whispers, the question containing multitudes of confusion, admiration, and desperate need to understand what he's just witnessed. Elijah's response carries the quiet wisdom of someone who has always understood that the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody notices. "I never needed anyone to see me, coach. I just needed to see everything else." The tournament concludes with medal ceremonies and team rankings. But these administrative details feel anticlimactic after witnessing the systematic destruction of every assumption about wrestling talent and preparation. Elijah Carter, regional champion, accepts his trophy with the same modest demeanor he's carried throughout his athletic education. As Jefferson's team prepares to leave, Troy Maddox approaches his transformed teammate with an expression that mixes apology with desperate curiosity. The arrogant captain who spent months mocking Elijah's presence now faces the humbling reality that the person he dismissed as worthless has achieved something that Troy himself has never accomplished. Troy begins, then stops, unable to find words that adequately address the magnitude of his miscalculation. "I was wrong about you." Elijah's response reveals the true measure of his character. Not the killer instinct that dominated wrestling mats, but the quiet dignity that chose grace over vengeance when offered the opportunity for both. "You weren't wrong about anything, Troy. You just saw what everyone else wanted you to see." He pauses, medal glinting under gymnasium lights. "But sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't need anyone to know how strong they are." The ride back to Jefferson High happens in contemplative silence, each team member processing the day's events through their own lens of understanding. Coach Reynolds stares at the regional championship trophy, physical proof that everything he thought he knew about wrestling development has been proven incomplete. But in the quiet of that team bus, Elijah Carter sits near the back and allows himself one small smile. Not because he won. Somewhere in his mind he'd always believed this moment was possible. But because winning feels exactly like he thought it would, not triumphant or vindicating, but simply like the natural conclusion to months of preparation that everyone else missed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, state championship pressure, and expectations that dwarf anything he's faced before. But tonight, Jefferson High's wrestling program has been forever changed by the quiet revolution of someone who learned that being invisible can be the most powerful preparation of all. The bus disappears into December darkness, carrying a regional champion who proved that sometimes the most dangerous dreams are the ones that nobody sees coming.